We are back with episode number 9 now of NHL Deal or No Deal, and I think this is going to be the last one for a while, maybe till the 2019-2020 season does start, because it is getting a little bit repetitive. I see a lot of the same names. Jesse Puljujarvi is in every other comment, a lot of Edmonton Oilers trades, guys like Shane Gostisbehere, Rasmus Ristolainen, Jason Zucker. It's just getting pretty repetitive, so I think I might wait a couple months to do the next one, and maybe we'll have some new players in the trade rumors, so I think it would maybe keep things fresh and not have the series be so repetitive. But episode 9, we are here for it, and then episode 10 maybe will come in a couple of months. But not wasting any more time, let's jump right into the video. First comment comes from Buckduke1, who says Josh Ho-Sang for Jesse Puljujarvi. Now this trade definitely makes sense. It's two young players that haven't worked out with the team that drafted them. Obviously everybody knows that Jesse Puljujarvi wants out of Edmonton, or he threatened to go play in Europe next year, and I don't think Edmonton wants that. I think they can probably get something in return. I mean, he was a 4th overall pick, albeit his trade value has definitely diminished a lot over the past year and a half, and now that basically everybody knows he wants to be traded, you don't really have any leverage in a Jesse Puljujarvi trade either. But honestly, I wouldn't do this if I was Edmonton, because Josh Ho-Sang I think has showed less at an NHL level than Jesse Puljujarvi has. I still think I would much rather have Jesse Puljujarvi of these two players. It definitely does make sense though, because sometimes a fresh start is all it takes for a young player to break out. We saw it with Dylan Strome, we saw it with Max Domi, and maybe we'll see it with one of these two players if they are to be traded over the next couple of months. Next up, we have a comment from the name you see on the screen. I'm not going to try to pronounce that because I know I'm just going to butcher it, but they say Chicago receives Jesse Puljujarvi and Edmonton receives Brendan Perlini and a 2020 4th round pick. Now these guys are both restricted free agents, so Chicago would kind of put themselves in the same situation if they bring in Jesse Puljujarvi, who, you know, maybe has higher upside than Brendan Perlini, but honestly at this point I don't even know what Puljujarvi's trade value is and what other GMs see him as. Maybe do they see him as a potential top 6 forward, a third line, you know, power forward type player? I honestly have no clue, and that's why I'm super intrigued to see what trade eventually goes down involving Jesse Puljujarvi, if there is any trade. But if Edmonton could get back Brendan Perlini and a 4th round pick, I think they would be more than happy, because maybe you can try Brendan Perlini with Connor McDavid and, you know, the quest to find him some wingers that he has good chemistry with. I like this trade. I think it makes sense, but honestly I'm just going to say no deal, because for Chicago it kind of just puts them in the same situation. They don't have Perlini signed right now because they don't really have the money, and Puljujarvi, they would have to do the same thing. So I'm going to say no deal. Honestly, like the idea of swapping the two players, but right now for Chicago, I really just don't think it makes any sense. This next comment comes from Fruity Tooty Man, who says St. Louis trades Jake Allen to Columbus for Korpisalo, and he gives some reasoning. St. Louis moves on from Allen while also getting a fresh young goalie in return, and Allen will get a fresh start. Love the vids, keep it up. Thank you for the support. But I think I'm going to say no deal from Columbus's side. I feel like if they do trade one of the two goaltenders that they have now, it would be for a bona fide, you know, veteran starter, and I don't really know what Jake Allen is capable of. I think honestly maybe he is just better suited as a backup goaltender for the St. Louis Blues, you know, as kind of an insurance policy in case Jordan Binnington's year was a fluke. I've said that in an earlier video. I don't think it was a fluke, but you always like to have that, you know, backup plan there. So I wouldn't be surprised if St. Louis does move on from Jake Allen, and I know Columbus is probably in the market for a veteran goaltender, but trading Korpisalo straight up for Jake Allen, I honestly don't think that would be a good deal for Columbus, because Korpisalo does have some promise and in my opinion in the future can be a starting goaltender. This next trade comes from Riley, who says Ehlers to Buffalo and Ristolainen to Winnipeg. Now this one kind of makes sense because Winnipeg did lose out on a lot of their defensive depth this summer, with Tyler Myers signing in Vancouver, Jacob Trouba being traded to the Rangers, and then obviously Ben Sherratt going to the Montreal Canadiens. They did bring in Neil Pionk, who's probably going to play top 4 minutes, and maybe a guy like Sami Niku is ready to come in and play an NHL role. Maybe you try Logan Stanley at the NHL level. There's a lot of things they could do, but their defense definitely did get worse this summer, and I'm not even sure if getting Ristolainen would be that much of an upgrade, because while yes, he put up numbers last season for Buffalo, it was an abysmal defensive season for him, and I think trading away Nick Ehlers would leave a hole in the top 6, so I'm not too big of a fan of this deal. I think Winnipeg should keep Nick Ehlers around, because in my opinion he is a player that can put up, you know, 70, maybe even a point per game, especially playing with some talented guys. So this one kind of does make sense, but from Winnipeg's side, I am going to say no deal. This next trade comes from the Cringe Man, who says Saad to Arizona for a 1st round pick. Now this would free up $6 million in cap space for the Chicago Blackhawks that they definitely need, and then they would probably be able to re-sign RFA Brendan Perlini, and then maybe he could replace Saad in that top 6, and then you get an extra 1st round pick for a team in Arizona that's probably a bubble playoff team, and you never know, that could could be a lottery pick, but even then I still think it is a risk because Brendan Perlini in your top 6 over Saad would definitely be a downgrade in my opinion, and if Chicago wants to get back into the playoffs, I definitely think they should keep Brendan Saad around. Even though he is overpaid, I still think he can be like a 50-point guy and maybe 30 goals if he does stay healthy and have a really good year. Arizona getting Saad, I think that would be a really good fit, but honestly from Chicago's side, I think I'm going to say no deal to this one because I think they're dead set on making the playoffs, and I think if they want to do that, keeping Saad around would be a smart move. Moving along, we have a trade from Jacob Kravatz who says Josh Ho-Sang for Sonny Milano, and like the earlier trade in this video, Ho-Sang for Puljujarvi, this is just swapping two young players who both need a fresh start, and I honestly like this one a little bit more, and I'm going to go ahead and say deal to this one because I think Milano and Josh Ho-Sang are more on a similar skill set level and potential level than Jesse Puljujarvi and Josh Ho-Sang, and I think Milano going to Long Island, getting an opportunity there would definitely benefit him, and Josh Ho-Sang getting an opportunity to be an offensive weapon in Columbus who is now looking for them since Petero, Duchesne, and Dzingel are all gone. So I actually like this trade a lot, and I'm going to say deal to this one. Moving along, we have a trade from Robert Petero who says Perlini for a Pittsburgh first-round pick. Now this one is interesting. Pittsburgh does want to shake up the roster, and they kind of already did that this summer in a big way trading Phil Kessel, but if they wanted to do it even more, getting a guy like Perlini I think could be in the cards for them, but I'm not quite sure if a first-round pick is, too much to give up for Brendan Perlini. I don't really know what his value is. I think maybe a second-round pick and maybe like a decent role player or something like that, or like a third-round pick in a player. I think giving up a first for a guy like Perlini who is an RFA, hasn't proven too much just yet at an NHL level, but definitely has the potential. It kind of would be a risk, but maybe a risk Pittsburgh would be willing to take, but honestly I think I'm going to say no deal, but I like the idea of Perlini going to Pittsburgh. Next up, we have a trade from JonnyHockey 21 who says Jason Zucker to the Flames for Backlund and a second-round pick. Now for the Flames, I think this would be an amazing deal, but if Minnesota does trade Jason Zucker, and I honestly don't think they will because just based off the moves they made this summer, I think they want to compete, but maybe if they get off to like a horrible start and they do eventually trade him, I think it'll probably be for like a prospect in the pick, some younger assets for the future, not a guy like Michael Backlund who is on a pretty hefty contract and is already 30 plus years old. You are getting a second-round pick, but I'm not quite sure if that is something Minnesota wants to do, so I'm going to say no deal because like I said, if they eventually do trade Zucker, I think it'll be for some pieces for the future. Moving along, we have a trade from DekeaSaurus Rex, and I want to say this before I get into it. Deke, if you're watching this, I used to love your NHL videos, man. I hope you come back in NHL 20 and start making content again. You're definitely one of the top NHL YouTubers when I was growing up, but with all that being said, he says Pavel Zacha for Jesse Puljujarvi, and this one makes sense. I think their trade value is probably on a similar level in terms of it really being diminished since both of these guys have been drafted. For Zacha, especially after Heischer and Hughes have been drafted, he's just getting bumped further and further down the center depth chart, and everyone knows Puljujarvi wants out of Edmonton, so I'm actually going to say deal to this one. It would be a cheap option for Puljujarvi to come into New Jersey and maybe try his luck in a bottom 6 role and get some power play time, and then for Pavel Zacha, maybe you can try him with Connor McDavid or Leon Draisaitl, because at this point they're really trying anything on the wing and seeing if it clicks with McDavid. So I like this trade a lot, and I'm going to say deal to it. This next trade comes from sheldoge who says Tj Brodie and Michael frolik to Minnesota for Jared Spurgeon. And again, I think if Minnesota does become sellers and get off to a rough start, if they trade a guy like Zucker or if they trade a guy like Jared Spurgeon, I think it'll be for some younger assets like a draft pick and a prospect, kind of the same thing as I said with Jason Zucker. So I'm going to say no deal for this one because I don't really know if this trade makes Minnesota any better, and it definitely doesn't set them up better for the future whatsoever. So I'm going to say no deal to this one, but I wouldn't be surprised if Minnesota does become sellers and start shipping out some of their veteran players if they get off to a bad start. Moving along, we have yet another Brendan Perlini trade. This one comes from Boss Dog fan page, and it's Brendan Perlini to the Boston Bruins for Brandon Carlo, swapping restricted free agents. And I'm going to go out and say no deal because, like I said, this would just put Chicago in the exact same situation where they're trying to find cap space to sign another restricted free agent. I think if Perlini does get moved, it'll probably be for a very cheap option or maybe for no players at all and just getting some draft picks in return so they don't have to take any money on back. And they'd be getting another defenseman, but they already have, made a couple moves on their blue line this summer, and I think they're happy with it, and I don't really see them making any other adjustments to their blue line, so I'm going to say no deal to this one. Now, finishing off the video with a trade from R2N, who says Nemestikov for a third to Columbus. Now, this one I'm actually going to say deal to. I think Columbus, taking a shot at a guy like Nemestikov, who isn't on the greatest contract, but I think he is still young enough to finally have a breakout season, and maybe getting getting that opportunity in Columbus would be good for him, and Columbus does have plenty of cap space, and taking on Nemestikov's contract wouldn't really put them in a bad position whatsoever. And obviously this really makes sense for the New York Rangers because they are trying to get some cap flexibility, and only taking on a draft pick in return, just getting off that salary and not taking anything back, would be a really good move for them. So I think this makes sense for both sides, and finishing out the video, I'm going to say deal on this. So that is going to wrap up today's deal or no deal. I really hope you guys did enjoy. Like I said at the start, this might be the last one for a couple months just because I want to keep things fresh, and it has got a little bit repetitive, over the past couple of episodes. But you guys always show support on this series, and if you want to see me keep doing it every second week, and maybe you guys can just try to get some newer players in the comments, then make sure to let me know that down in the comments section as well. And with all that being said, I hope you guys all enjoyed today's video. If you did, please make sure to drop a like on it and subscribe to the channel for daily NHL content, and I will see you guys all in the next video.